Hello and welcome to another installment of Fedora Fiction Podcasts. We are reading from the novel Ares Triumphant, and we are on Chapter 15. Chapter 15 is called 4 Years. If you launch within 27 days, 4 hours and 32 minutes, Lima informed them, the trip back to Earth will take 178 days, 8 hours and 42 minutes. Approximately, O'Shea added dryly. Yes, Lima confirmed. Approximately. O'Shea and Xhang were inspecting and stowing the rations they had found at the ruins of the refinery. And if we don't launch in 27 days? Xhang asked. The next such window will not open, so to speak, for 5 years, Lima replied. No pressure, Xhang muttered grimly. And if we miss the window and launch anyway? O'Shea asked. The trip could take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years, if you get there at all, Lima replied cheerfully. Sounds to me like we're blasting out inside of 27 days, Xhang observed. If we can, O'Shea countered, we have no idea what shape our transport is in. Or do we, Lima? All the interior structures and functions are intact, Lima replied. But I have no data on what the condition of the outer hull. Does it matter? Xhang asked impatiently. Is there anything we can do about it if there is a problem? That depends on what the problem is, O'Shea mused, but I take your point. It's the only transport we have. He paused as he rehydrated 2 cups of coffee. But there is one problem I do anticipate: life support. The transport is automated. Anyone traveling on it is supposed to be in stasis. Well, there's no fucking way I'm going back into stasis, Xhang said quietly as she accepted a cup from O'Shea. I can't get that woman back at the ruins out of my head. It's not an option anyway, O'Shea replied. The only unit we have is the one I was in, and after what happened to you, I'm in no hurry to go back into stasis either. So what do we do? I don't know. Third base, Lima piped in gleefully. What? Zhang asked, frowning in confusion. What third base? O'Shea closed his eyes and sighed. It's a joke that would be futile to try to explain, he said assertively as if to head up any attempt to explain. But speaking of another base, were you able to get the tunnel map from the O'Shea base? Lima? Yes, the network is quite extensive, his Lima responded. And Dr. Zhang is correct. We should be able to get to the mining station in less than 3 hours, assuming all the tunnels still exist. A major assumption, O'Shea noted grimly. Worst case scenario, Lima, how long would the most indirect route take? Well, the possibilities are almost infinite, Lima protested. A reasonable estimate would be 15 hours. Just 15 hours? Not 15 hours, 27 minutes, and 12 seconds? If you want a more precise estimate, Lima replied haughtily, you will have to specify a route. I suppose a reasonable estimate will have to do, O'Shea replied, a mischievous smile playing on his face. He turned to Xhang. Are you up for another outing? No, she admitted, but I may never be, and we don't have time to waste. I say we leave as soon as possible. O'Shea nodded. We'll be traveling under the ice, so we don't need to consider daylight. I suggest we stock up the 8C, get some rest, and leave in, say, 5 hours. He looked at Xhang. Okay, she said simply. She grew thoughtful for a moment. The thing that bothers me is, what if one of the other stasis units fail while we're gone? That would be inconvenient, O'Shea admitted. He thought a moment. Ideally, we would resuscitate them all just so we had control over the timing in the process, but we have finite resources, and they're probably better off in stasis if they can stay there. He looked at her a moment. I know you're worried about your friends, but they really are safer in stasis. They're not my fucking friends, Zhang spat angrily. They're a bunch of fucking prime dons. Well, Leia's okay, I guess, but the other three, she shook her head. They are, however, my responsibility. Okay, but you just made another argument for keeping them under, O'Shea pointed out. He drained his coffee. I suppose we could split up. One of us go to the mining station, and the other stay to babysit the stasis units. He offered with a frown. I don't like it because we don't know what we'll find at the station. A second brain and a pair of hands may come in handy. Zhang mirrored his frown, but nodded. I'm forced to agree with you there, she said. She stared a moment and sighed. Well, if one of them tries to wake up while we're gone and gets into trouble, it'll serve him fucking right. O'Shea lay in his bunk but could not sleep. Too many persistent and unanswered questions bounced around in his brain. He honestly felt the trip to the mining station was an unnecessary risk and a waste of time, but he had to respect Zhang's principles and compassion, as he was keenly aware that there may come a time when he will need both. He looked across the room to Zhang's bunk. She lay with her back to him, breathing regularly. He slipped silently out of his bed and walked quietly to the kitchen area. Shouldn't you be resting? Lima asked. Yes, Lima, I should, but I can't. He rehydrated a cup of coffee after checking on the supply. Tell me, Lima, is there enough atmosphere stored in the biosphere units to make the transport hold livable? Yes, Lima replied, but there is no way to heat or purify it. No, there isn't, O'Shea sighed, retrieving the cup from the rehydrator. We'll have to bring a habitat somehow. That would be extremely challenging and risky, Lima pointed out. The habitat, as you know, was not designed to be moved once deployed. There is a 97.6% probability that it will be irreparably damaged simply transporting it to the cargo station, let alone getting it into orbit. O'Shea sat at the table and stared into his coffee cup. What if we undeployed it? He asked. What? What if we reversed the deployment, folded it back up to get back on the transport? It wasn't designed to do that either, Lima observed. Exasperated, we would have to manually release the latches on the seams, he speculated, but the auto-assembly sequence would just have to be run in reverse. I have no data on the likely success or failure of that, Lima noted dubiously. We'd have to repack and restow some things, O'Shea mused, looking around, or pack them separately altogether. Let me give this some thought, he added to Lima. In the meantime, you work out the necessary calculations to create a roll on the transport so we have some artificial gravity. As you wish. There followed a brief silence then. What if one of the stasis units does fail while you're gone? Then he locked the auto-resuscitation protocol will initiate like it did for Dr. Xhang, and you can make them feel at home until we get back. If it doesn't? Well, O'Shea sighed grimly, then that's one less thing to get on the transport. Aren't you the sentimentalist, Zhang, who had suddenly appeared in the kitchen as sarcastically? Remind me not to have you speak at my funeral. O'Shea turned to look at her. You couldn't sleep either? She sat at the table and put her head in her hands. I'd just start to drift off, and then that scene in the infirmary would jump into my head, she said with a sigh. Is there more coffee? O'Shea put a cup on the rehydrator and looked at her. He was about to remind her that they could encounter similar scenes at the mining base, but thought better of it. Xhang was coping pretty well, considering what she had been facing. It would be sadistic to add more anxieties. Those would come soon enough of their own accord. Instead, he asked, shall we make an early departure of it? We're both up. Zhang nodded. Just let me finish my coffee and I'll be ready. O'Shea steered the HC out of the airlock and set the auto navigation with the route Lima had worked out. The headlights illuminated only 20 meters ahead of them, so Zhang activated the radar, which at the moment showed only a long, featureless tunnel. She sat back in her seat and sighed. It feels like we've been living in this fucking thing. O'Shea chuckled wryly. Still, it's making these trips in the AT. I bet it what? Wait, are you telling me you got from your base to O'Shea base in that AT? Zhang asked incredulously. Yep. How did you? I brought extra oxygen and batteries. But that had to be at least 30 hours, Zhang exclaimed. It's more like 40 with the dust storm, O'Shea corrected. But didn't you have to? Yes, and you don't want to know how. Zhang shook her head. I can see how this would seem like first class after that. They continued on in silence for a time until Zhang excused herself to go lie down in the bed in the back of the cabin. O'Shea alternately stared at the icy tunnel illuminated by the headlights and the radar screen. Both presented monotonous views. Lima, O'Shea said quietly so as not to disturb Zhang. How about some Mozart, but at low volume? As you wish, Lima replied quietly. The sound of chamber music filled the cabin as O'Shea continued to stare out the windshield. He must have drifted off for a moment as he was startled awake by a notification signal from the radar. He looked at the screen and saw an object in the tunnel 432 meters away. It was much smaller than the HC, and as the vehicle approached, O'Shea was glad Zhang wasn't up to see it, as it was a body clad in an EVA. They encountered several more similarly clad bodies and later abandoned vehicles, ATs like the one O'Shea had repaired. They were only 2 hours into their 3-hour trip when the radar indicated a wall 500 meters ahead. Looks like the tunnel collapsed, Lima, O'Shea said quietly. Can you work out an alternate route? You'll have to backtrack 231.6 meters to the last tunnel intersection, Lima replied. I'll reset the auto-navigation program. The HC halted and executed a perfect K-turn to head back down the tunnel. What happened? Why did we stop? Zhang appeared from the back. There was a tunnel collapse, O'Shea replied. Lima has worked out an alternate route, but we have to backtrack a little. She collapsed into a seat. How much longer will that take? She asked morosely. Unless there are more tunnel collapses, the new route will bring you to your destination in 2 hours, 5 minutes, and 23 seconds, Lima announced. Zhang sighed and looked over at O'Shea. I'll take this shift, she said woodenly. Why don't you try and get some rest? O'Shea nodded and stood up. You might see some things in the tunnel, he said matter-of-factly. Don't let them upset you. Zhang continued to look at him, although she seemed to be looking through him. Okay, she said hollowly and turned her gaze back to the windshield. O'Shea lay back on the narrow bed and stared up at the ceiling as Mozart continued to drip back to his ears. There was a steady rocking to the HC as it trundled along the tunnel, and O'Shea drifted off in spite of himself. The rocking stopped, and O'Shea woke abruptly as Zhang announced quietly, We're here. He looked out the windshield to see the headlights illuminating an open cargo airlock door. They didn't even bother to close the door behind them, O'Shea muttered dryly. I don't think anyone thought there would be people coming. Back, Zhang noted flatly. O'Shea nodded. Listen, he said unnecessarily. If you want, I could go in alone and check things out, and if I find something I need help with, I can let you know. She turned her gaze back to him, but this time appeared to be seeing him. Thanks, she replied, but no one is going in there alone. Besides, this was my idea. The two pulled on the EVAs in an awkward pas de deux, necessitated by the tight quarters of the cabin. Helmets secured, they stepped into the airlock. Checking communications, O'Shea said aloud. Reading you loud and clear, Lima replied. Same here, Zhang added perfunctorily. They stepped out of the airlock and strode through the now mostly empty cargo hold and out onto the ice. Their twin helmet lights lanced at the darkness that seemed as thick and dense as fog. All that was visible was what appeared in the 4 discs of light produced by their helmet lights. O'Shea had turned off the HC headlights to conserve power. The outside door of the cargo airlock was indeed wide open, and as the two entered, they noted that the inner door was open as well. Both O'Shea and Zhang seemed to feel a sense of foreboding as they approached the inner door, as the two hesitated and looked wordlessly at one another before walking through. Unlike the scene of chaos at the refinery, what the two encountered was an area that appeared to be picked clean of anything useful. Their lights probed corners of what were the locker rooms, locker doors carefully closed on empty storage spaces. There was not an extra EVA, battery, or oxygen bottle to be found. They moved through to a workshop area devoid of equipment, tools, and devoid of equipment, tools, and machinery. It seems the miners had more notice, O'Shea speculated as they walked through. Their departure seems more deliberate. I moved through the workshop through the two open airlocks doors in what appeared to be a dining hall area. Here, the long rows of tables with their attendant chairs did remain, although meal rehydrators and Nutri-Rumens were conspicuously absent. Not even an empty ration pack littered the floor. I don't know why, Xhang says finally as they complete their circuit of the room, but this is even creepier than the refinery. They moved to another open door, and as they were about to walk through, O'Shea stopped. Wait, he said, and stepped back to shine his lights on the control panel, which was blasted open and blackened. It looks like this door was deliberately shorted. Why would someone do that? Xhang made no reply and continued on through the door as O'Shea followed. They appeared to be in a dormitory, but as before, the rooms were clean and orderly, although the beds lacked mattresses and bedding. The two stood on opposite sides of a long hallway and shone their lights into the rooms. O'Shea was inspecting his third room, which contained the missing rehydration units and Nutri-Rumens, when he spotted something different on the walls. Clara, he said, come look at this. Xhang stepped across the hallway to join him in the doorway. What are those scratches in the wall? She murmured, and stepped in to examine them more closely. 1, 2, 3, 4 with diagonal lines through them. They're tally marks, she exclaimed as the realization struck him. Someone counting off the days of their contract? I don't think so, Xhang replied soberly. The standard contract was for 2 years on Mars, not counting time in stasis. If these are tallying days, then they count off. She looked around the room, calculating under her breath. Over 4 years. Why would anyone tally on the walls? O'Shea asked as they walked back to the hallway. Could buy a countdown calendar, and even in my time. We had CDCs as well, Xhang noted quietly. Maybe they weren't counting down. She looked at O'Shea significantly through her helmet. They continued down the hall, passing empty dorm room after empty room. Xhang stopped in front of a closed door, which, when O'Shea got there, he saw was marked infirmary. The door appeared undamaged and the control panel intact. The two looked at one another. Xhang nodded. O'Shea found the manual release, and the two drew stealing breaths before pulling the door open. The medical platform stood ready and unoccupied. Scant supplies and equipment were properly stowed. Conspicuously absent were bodies and stasis units. The two simultaneously exhaled in relief. Maybe everyone made it out, O'Shea remarked hopefully. They emerged from the infirmary and continued down the hall, inspecting empty rooms from the doorways. They finally came to the end, and O'Shea saw Xhang gesture to the blasted-out control panel on the door to the last room. The two approached the doorway together and shined their lights into the room. What they saw there brought a lump to O'Shea's throat. Lining the walls along the floor were desiccated mummies and mutual huddled embraces. Etched into the wall opposite the door was a short note. To anyone finding us, we tried to hang on, but after over 4 years of waiting, we ran out of food and air. We all agreed it was better to die with dignity than to waste away in a vain hope. We are sorry if you came all this way to rescue us for nothing. That ends chapter 15. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please like, share, comment, critique, and also please go check out amazon.com/author/Tom Goss to look at all the offerings by Fedora Fiction Press, who is our sponsor. I'm Tom Goss, and I appreciate your listening.